This podcast is made possible in part through the support of Recording Magazine. Recording Magazine is a great place to find out more about recording tools, techniques, ideas, and directions. So thanks to them for their help, and now enjoy this discussion with Erin Barra. Okay, today I have the great pleasure of getting to speak to Erin Barra. I was first introduced to her by Ben Casey, one of the product specialists for Ableton. He pointed me at her as having a pretty incredible resume, and when I looked into it, I was pretty stunned. It was, in fact, an amazing resume. And so she helped me out with an article that I did for Recording Magazine, and I took the opportunity to bug her for a podcast interview, and so here she is. So with that, I'm going to say hello to Erin. Hey, Erin, how are you?
I'm so good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I really like the fact that you have a co-pilot with you today.
I do. My 5-month-old son is actually about 12 feet away. My husband is luckily here and holding him, but we are in the same house, so right. you will hear him.
Indeed. That's great. All right. So I gave a really mealy-mouthed version of what you do because you have such an incredible both resume and current working stack. So why don't we have you describe what you do?
Well, I'd say in the past 5 years, it's kind of been this like pyramid where I'm spending time on one of 3 projects. So my main focus a lot of the time these days is working for Berkeley. I'm an associate professor there in the songwriting department, but I manage all of their technology curriculum. So it's, I focus on teaching technology tools to really creative people, which is more or less my niche at the college. And I also do a lot of curriculum development for Berkeley Online, which is largely, again, creative Ableton curriculum. So it's right. Composition-based. And then another third of the time, I run an organization called Beats by Girls, which is an organization which mobilizes local groups of women to sort of start their own, I like to call them digital girls rock clubs. It's like music production rock clubs for girls. And then the other time is spent freelancing, and those projects are really extremely varied. Sometimes I'm working for music tech companies. Like I did a huge project for Rolly. Sometimes I'm freelancing for private clients. Like I'm working for Wayne Brady right now on his comedy special. Artists, production. It's kind of, whatever comes at me that's not Beats by Girls in Berkeley.
Right. In that freelancing work, you kind of have a nice role on your website that kind of introduces people to some of your production work. And it's kind of remarkable the breadth of stuff you've done. You've done everything from kind of contemporary country to hip hop and everything in between.
Yeah, I like making music. That's the only continuing thread through all of that.
Right. That's great. But I am really curious about the Beats by Girls thing. I've actually run into different organizations that have talked about it. Can you explain a little bit more about what that organization is, where it's located, and how people run across it?
Sure. So it started in 2013. We had a single chapter in New York City, and that was at the Lower East Side Girls Club on the far east side of Manhattan. And at first it was just music production classes for schoolgirls, and there was a huge amount of traction and response right away, which is rare, I think, for music industry, anything. So I kind of knew I was onto something right away. And from there, instead of sort of forming chapters ourselves, we put together the steps and the materials for local women to start their own chapters. So we're really enabling regional groups of women to take the steps to make their own Beats by Girls chapters, and then they get to take ownership over that work and be responsible. So it's, I think, better for both parties. Like, we don't have to work hard, and then they also get to feel really attached and like it's their personal work that they've done, which I think is missing in a lot of the role of helping people. It's strange and convoluted. Yeah, so now we have chapters all over. We've got Boston, New York, LA, Bridgeport, Phoenix, Minneapolis, Chicago, Austin, Edmonton, Canada. Like, it just goes on. And we get, I'd say, maybe 4 people a month that reach out to us about wanting to start their own chapters. And sometimes it's not meant to be, and then other times it happens. And we've been growing organically and steadily ever since 2013.
Sure. What do you do when people reach out to you? What do you do to sort of like either encourage or discourage them? I mean, do you have like materials and sort of like a setup pack to get going, or is it more just kind of like emotional support that you provide?
Oh yeah, there's a page on the website that sort of outlines all the different pieces that need to fall in place for a chapter to successfully launch. I mean, the real issue is that every community is different, right? So being in LA, there's a lot more access to like-minded individuals or DJ production schools, or just even spaces where you could hold classes, versus we're starting a chapter in Duluth and that's not the case. So they've had to really spend a lot of time sort of developing the different things that are necessary. So we outline what you need in order to make it happen, and then the ways that we can help make that possible. But the hard part is beginning. We just sort of get in where we can and help each of these groups of women. So after they sort of peruse the many necessary elements, then we set up a call. We have 2 women who work on chapter development and sort of see how we can help. And, we just very plainly give it to them straight, saying, this is what it takes, this is how we can help. And if they feel like they are capable of taking those next steps, then we hold their hand through them.
I live near Minneapolis, and I know the Beats by Girls here is connected to the Slam Academy, and they are really excited about what they've seen, not only in terms of the support, but just kind of the energy that comes from the whole project.
Yeah, the women in Minneapolis are very dedicated, and they're one of our more thriving chapters for sure. They've taken an idea and created like real tangible results with it. Right.
Now let's go to the third leg of the triangle here, which is your work at Berkeley. I noticed that you really kind of, you have 2 like significant chunks of teaching, which is a lot about songwriting, but also about music tech. And I have to admit, a lot of times it seems like those are really 2 very disconnected worlds, right? But you found a way to connect them in some way.
I mean, I don't think that they're disconnected. I think that's the misconception, actually, especially in academia, is that, these processes are siloed. Like this technical person over here that's behind the glass does all the technical tasks, and they don't contribute to the creative elements of the composition, and then vice versa. There's this very creative individual who doesn't understand or know any of the technical aspects of what goes into it. But I was just talking to somebody at the Career Center. I have to look up, what was the word they used? It was something like shifters, or it's like instead of being millennials, it's like this generation of people who are multi-dimensional, are like multi-hyphenates, right?
Oh,
it's like
right. Okay.
Social media specialist / songwriter / producer / manager, because they require this very wide breadth of skills in order to be employable in what's a very volatile situation in the industry.
Right.
So, more often than not, I find it to be very surprising when there's a writer who doesn't know how to, at the very least, demo their own songs. And just that skill in and of itself makes such a huge impact over maintaining control over your content, or getting results out of a producer that are much more aligned with what your initial vision was. However the tech skills manifest themselves, I think that all writers or all composers need to have them now, whereas even 10 years ago, that was not the case. So, for me, when you approach teaching it, if you're teaching technology to a creative person, then it really only makes sense to teach them those tools through their own creative process. Because then they get excited about it. Then it makes sense. It seems applicable. There's not a lot of conversation about, how it all works. And it's really focused more on making it work and making music within like the first 5 minutes of class. And, it's very powerful.
Do you ever find situations, though, where someone comes in thinking that they want to be a songwriter and falls in love with the technology part of it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have students, so I do teach the songwriting core at the college. So,
Right.
I'll have third semester, I think that's like the earliest that I've taught, is third or fourth semester students. And they'll come into my songwriting 1 class and I'll start demoing some of the technology because I use it as a teaching tool also.
Right.
And they'll, say to themselves, that's cool. Like I need to know more about that. And so then they'll enroll in an Ableton course with me. And then, since I'm teaching it as a writing tool, it's just, again, a further extension of their creativity. And then all of a sudden, you'll have met them when they're 19 years old and they were acoustic singer-songwriter, like folk musicians. And then, by the time they're 22 or 21, they're like electronic goddesses or, whatever. Like I've seen so many transformations take place. And I think that a lot of them just feel powerful. It's like you gave them every single sound, every single idea, like, and just right at their fingertips. And, that's an exciting thing for a creative person.
Yeah, I imagine you see people just really, really flying once they get access to all that stuff. One of the things that I like doing in the podcast is I like talking to people about their background and how they got to be the artists, creators that they are. And one of the things you didn't even talk about is the fact that you have a very active songwriting and artist schedule as well. And so you kind of have this really Renaissance, multi-hyphenate kind of life yourself as kind of an academic, but also this community builder, a producer, a product person, and technologist, but also an artist. Where did you come from that you feel comfortable in all these zones?
I'm from Utah.
Well, that explains everything.
I'm from Salt Lake City, and my father is an audiophile. So he's just like lives for extremely high-end audio. And he places speakers for a couple high-end speaker companies.
Okay.
So, they're like, these speakers are like 900 pounds each. So sort of like when you put them down, that's where they are and they don't move.
Right.
So he travels around and just helps people put speakers in the right places, which seems like a silly job, but that's really what he does. So we always had a room in our house that was just dedicated to listening. And, he's constantly like swapping out gear. And I knew about like ins and outs and signal flow when I was like 9 years old.
Right.
And then I was also simultaneously classically trained as a piano player I think they had me in a music preschool. So it was just always, as long as I can remember, music was always a thing. Whether I was like a hands-on active participant, but then also a huge amount of time as a passive listener.
Okay.
And I think that those two things combined really, it was everything because, I find that people are typically good at one or the other, like listening or actually saying something. And I happen to be kind of good at both of them. And it came into play as well when I started getting behind the tech tools, is that I could use my left brain. I could also use my right brain. Yeah, I went to Berkeley, actually. I got a piano performance and a songwriting degree from them in 2006.
Okay. And
then I never was really encouraged to get involved with technology until maybe I was 25. You hear the same story. Writers are like, these songs, my records, they're just not turning out the way that I envisioned them to be. I think this is like a a tale as old as time.
Right.
And, I felt that way, but I think I had spent so much time listening my entire life that I literally would not accept things to sound anything but exactly the way I wanted them to. So just one day, out of sheer frustration, decided I was going to get behind the computer and just figure it out, because that was the only thing that really made sense to me. So I started with Pro Tools. An engineer friend taught me how to edit, and that was kind of my first step into feeling like I was in control. And then the rest is just history, like after Pro Tools, then I started experimenting with Ableton live on stage, for the same reasons, like musicians weren't doing what was in my head.
Weren't doing right by you, right?
Yeah, so I started experimenting with like nonlinear creative technologies as well, as opposed to just linear DAWs. And then that was sort of like the explosion for me. And that's when my career really took off as well, is when I got into using live on stage and kind of found the tools to articulate things that had been floating in my mind for quite some time. And yeah, I mean, that was it. Once I had all the tools, I just, I was able to engage with so many different types of people and so many different types of projects, and, work really hard. And I think that people like working with me. So it just made it possible for me to do pretty much whatever I wanted. And I've been doing that, which is whatever I want I'd say for the past 6 years. And it feels great.
So growing up around an audiophile, that had to put like some pretty extreme pressure on what became good sounding music to you, right?
Yeah.
Did you grow up, were you mostly listening? I mean, when I think the people I've known that have been audiophiles, some of them are like extreme classical purists, and some of them are like extreme classic rock purists, or like certain time frames of jazz vinyl or whatever, right? What was your dad into, and how did you find that influencing sort of both your tastes and your kind of creative vision?
Well, he's not a purist in any sense of genre. I mean, he listens to a lot of classical music.
Okay.
He was born in like 1949, so he was like a child of the 60s and the 70s. So there's so much classic rock. I mean, not even classic rock. I would say more singer-songwriters like James Taylor, Billy Joel, Elton John,
Right,
so
right.
I think in that respect, that definitely influenced me as a writer, in a huge way. But then he does the jazz thing too. He's got like the old school Ella and Louis albums that he listens to a lot. And then like newer recordings, anything that's extremely high def. He's actually always looking for new music that's recorded really, really well. And it's a strange thing to talk about with somebody who's never really had the experience, but honestly, it's less about the music as it is about the sounds.
Right.
Because he'll listen to a song over and over and over and over and over, right? Like Paul Simon. Yeah. So Graceland is his reference song he uses when he's tuning rooms.
Okay.
So, he'll listen to it 15, 16 times over. And it's really like the process of inserting a new amplifier and, making sure just tweaking how the room sounds. Like that's what it's about for him. It's not even about lyric, melody, harmony, anything. It's all about sounds and frequencies and depth and warmth and width. It's a totally different way of listening to music.
Right. And yeah, that kind of concept of knowing something so well too that it ends up being able to point out even like minor inconsistencies. That's probably really important in that kind of a gig. For better or for worse, like it can make you crazy, but yeah. It's, once you get it right, you should see him. It's like he gets really excited, and I don't even like to start talking to him about it, because once you get started, he's like, somebody will talk to me about the things that I'm interested in. Let's sit down and talk for hours. I'm like, oh no, I know the D'Agostino amp is so great. Okay. Well, it's funny because every once in a while I get this like wild urge. Oh, I'm going to find out what these guys. So I'll go to a Barnes and Noble or something and pick up like the Absolute Sound magazine or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get about halfway through and I'm like, oh my God, this is where the religious zealots of sound live, right?
Yeah, it is like a culty thing for sure. Yeah, lots of very expensive components, that's for sure.
Right. The other thing that you mentioned there, though, that I found interesting is kind of this connection to some of the classic like vocalists and vocal songwriters. It's interesting to me because I feel like there are not as many, or we don't run across that as much in pop music anymore. It's almost like different parts of the music have come to the fore at the expense of songwriting in some cases.
I mean, I guess you could debate that either side, I think, because, sometimes there's many writers and like songs, they take so long to sort of take form and lots of people get their hands on them. And there was just this really interesting piece in the New York Times about that song called The Middle,
right.
Which had 7 different producers. And they had like 14 different vocalists cut the song before they actually chose the one. So, in a way, I think that recordings these days, there's actually a lot more that goes into it, just for better or worse, and I think in a mainstream capacity, the typical singer-songwriter isn't as prevalent, not
It's
to
a
say
prominent,
that it's
right, yeah.
Yeah, it's still there. You could definitely identify like Charlie Puth or, like John Mayer's still out there doing something.
Right.
So it's not like they're gone. And just in the mainstream, especially in a top 40 sense, you're not seeing a ton of that. But underneath the surface, there's a huge amount of people who are swimming in the middle that are, not in this top tier of monetized recordings. And there's so much happening, and on the independent side that I'm encouraged. I'd say more than discouraged.
Well, that's great. Yeah.
But it is kind of sad, like when you turn the radio on, you're like, what is going on?
Yeah, I hear you. Now, one of the things I'm glad I get to talk to you because one of the things that Berkeley does that has always been really interesting and kind of amazing to me is they've made a course of study around songwriting that almost looks like the technology of songwriting. I mean, there are many books that like break down structure or break down song narrative movement or whatever. I just the other day I was at a local bookstore and I ran across a series of the Berkeley books on songwriting, and I just love them because they, it's like poetry, but with music, There's a very studied approach to breaking down songs into the influences that it came from, the structure that it has, and why that structure works with this kind of lyricism and stuff like that. It's really amazing. Is that the kind of thing that you studied when you were there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the curriculum basically breaks down into 4 different elements. It's lyric, melody, harmony, rhythm, right? And then the application of that, and there's a concept that's the kind of the cornerstone of everything we do, which is called prosody, which basically just means like choosing the right musical tool to tell your story.
Okay.
So it's always connected back to like communicating some sort of a concept or emotion. And so when I was a writer, I was focused on those main 4 tools as a writer, but post Berkeley, I decided I wanted to work with sounds as well, and that was never a part of it. So now, that's like my contribution to what we do at the department is the same idea. It's like choosing the right musical tools to tell a story, but through these digital tools as well. So, reverbs or audio effects processing, virtual instruments, sequences, they're just more tools. But while I was there, it was definitely all just sort of, nuts and bolts, typical, or what people would typically assume is what a songwriter's role is.
Sure. Now, from the time that you went there to now the time that you're teaching, what have you seen that's changed significantly?
Inside of the department, it's kind of interesting because not a lot, except for all the stuff that I'm doing. I mean, the reason I was hired is because they knew they were kind of like staring down the barrel of the technology future that was hurtling towards them. So, I was hired to update things.
Sure.
But the core curriculum in terms of how we teach lyric writing, how we teach melody writing, like none of that's really changed.
Okay.
Maybe some of the examples or the application of those ideas has changed as the sounds and industry is pivoting, but the tools are the same. That's what we say. We teach tools, not rules. So it's like, here's an idea, here's a progression, here's a contour, like use it in whatever genre and apply it however you want to. So I mean, in that respect, I'd say nothing has changed.
That's actually interesting because, in that time period, music has changed significantly, but it's interesting that at least from these kind of methodologies and the concepts, that those still remain valid despite the changes in music.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that to be true. I mean, like, I guess one of the big differences is that lots of people are top lining now as opposed to 15 years ago when I was at the college. I was responsible for coming up with a harmonic progression, playing the instrument, and now people are writing melodies and lyrics on top of tracks that producers have already created.
I see. Okay. I didn't know what top lining was. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just basically melody and lyrics.
Right. Got it.
But the idea of how to write a melody hasn't changed. Maybe the application of how you actually, when you're doing it, how you're doing it is changing. But stepwise motion is stepwise motion. Like that didn't change in the past 10 years.
Right. And now within the framework too, one of the things that has changed, and it's actually been longer than that time frame, but nevertheless, we'll just use it as kind of examples. There have been changes that seem like they would break the process of typical songwriting tools and uses. Things like rapping and emceeing in hip hop genres, or complete lack of, certainly lack of lyrics, and oftentimes a lack of almost a discernible melody in a lot of EDM styles. How do the kind of classic songwriting concepts still match up when you have that significant of a change in the core understanding or the core production of music?
Again, I think it's just a matter of application. So, even if something has a significant amount of repetition, or if the main spotlight is put on the rhythmic components of what's happening.
Right.
The idea that like stable and unstable, tension and release. I mean, nobody wants to listen to music that does not develop at all. Right? It's just your ears become fatigued. You will literally change the channel. So even within music, which is highly repetitive, say even like loop-based EDM music, or hip hop music, which is written over a loop, like there has to be some sort of interest in there. So it's all about rhythmic development in that instance. If there's not a melodic emphasis in that case, or variation within patterns, whether it's like automation or fills or rhythmic variation, like the idea that something has to develop, and exposition of an idea, the development of that idea, the recapitulation of those ideas. I mean, that's like classic sonata form, and that's still the case with hip hop music. It's like the idea that motifs are shown to you, developed, and then re-shown to you. That's still true, even genres when repetition is like the main component.
Right. Even if the delivery is different, that mechanism still remains the same. Yeah.
I believe that to be true. Yes.
Sure. Interesting. Now, I'm curious, as a teacher in this, when you see students come in and then you see students grow over time, what are the places where you see the most development? This is painting with a broad brush, I realize, but I'm wondering, do you find that people generally become deeper in the kind of lyrics that they gravitate to? Do they find do you find people generally moving to more complicated harmonic structures, or what do you, is there any way to generalize how people grow in that kind of thing? Because oftentimes in academia, what you try and do is you try and say, okay, we're going to grow you along this path. I'm wondering, like, within the Berkeley system, what does that path look like?
Well, it's, I think, different for every single division and department, but, for our writers, once they hit a threshold of having taken, certain prerequisites, then we allow them to sort of choose their own adventure. So, we have one path that would lead them down a much more lyric-centric destination. And we have another one that's more for people who want to identify as singer-songwriters, who want to be performing and making a living as such. We have a path that's more for team writing. So again, like being involved with a publishing company or a label and writing for other artists. And then we have a self-producing songwriter track as well. Okay. So it's like once they get past a certain amount of curriculum, then we let them decide, how they identify, because like you said, like some people are really gravitate towards the technology tools, others are just about words. And we do this, well, in my songwriting 1 classes, we do an exercise where I'll put 4 words on the board: lyric, melody, harmony, rhythm. And then I have people put down what they think is the most important out of all 4 of those things at the top of the page. Okay. And then at the bottom of the page, they have to choose what's least important. And it's a very difficult question to ask, because right. they're all very important. It's not like, we're going to get rid of one someday. I think everybody's perception of it is so varied. Some people are all about lyrics, other people are all about harmony, and some people don't care about lyrics at all. Right. So the only reoccurring theme and I've asked this question to hundreds and hundreds of students at this point, is that nobody thinks melody is the least important. That's it. That is the only thing that we can say for certain.
That's actually really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting, especially because most people kind of think of like the loop/groove oriented stuff as kind of eliminating the necessity of melody.
Well, I mean, rhythms are pitches, right? It's
right.
Just like eventually if a rhythmic or a cycle gets played fast enough in succession, it becomes a pitch. So, I think that even if there's not pitch in a traditional sense, there absolutely is some sort of a contour. I mean, there's a rhythm and a melody to the way that we're speaking to each other right now. It's like right. Whether or not, it's there, melody exists in every sense, every context. And I think that it's a substantial part of hip hop and rap, just maybe not in the traditional context.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And it's one of those things where you have to just look at it from a different direction to see those same things occurring, right?
I think about this stuff all the time. I don't usually get a chance to like dive deep into the philosophical ideas about rhythms and melodies.
Well, but this is kind of cool, because it's kind of neat to be able to geek out about something that doesn't have a fuse sticking out of the back. But it's one of the reasons I was excited to get to talk to you, because again, with like this idea of approaching songwriting and song development from almost a technical perspective is something that somehow simultaneously speaks to the creative and the scientific or over intellectual parts of my brain simultaneously, which is really powerful.
I agree. Yeah. It's when I get into my flow, when I'm being creative inside of a DAW, it's like I almost black out, because my brain is working so hard on both sides that it's almost like a meditation of sorts. Like my brain becomes so active that I'm actually unable to think regular thoughts, right. Which plague my everyday. I think about shit all day long. Once I stop, it feels fantastic. So, I think that's really why I love creating in this sense.
Right. Now, given that you kind of have you have this thing where part of your practice is like doing doing freelance work with like people doing hardware and software. I'm curious, and also that music tech is part of your teaching practice. What for you represents the point at which the technology becomes kind of important for its own sake, and how do you prevent that from like messing with your ability to still do creative work? For me, a lot of times the second that I start embracing the technology, my creative mind slams shut, and now I'm in screwdriver and soldering iron mode.
So I believe that like everything reveals itself in its own time, right? So I don't believe that, this week we're going to talk about the MIDI spec, right? Like this is a hugely important thing to understand, especially if you want to do certain type of work, right? But the MIDI spec works without us having to understand it, right? So I sort of allow my students to stumble into these concepts. Like I'm trying to get my device to sort of listen to me in one context and then not in another, but then be able to do this on another track. It's like they're describing a creative thing or a vision they have of something that they want to accomplish, but they don't yet understand the mechanism behind any of these devices or how it works. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, in that sense, when somebody is creatively invested in how something might work, then we start talking about being really technical, and I'm like, well, let's talk about how the MIDI protocol works. This is the messages. This is how they get sent. This is what CCs are, and then they're just like, minds are blown, like I've been doing this wrong the whole time. But then the technical process becomes creative because it's like, okay, there's, X number of ways to get to this destination. I could put things on multiple tracks. I could have separate virtual instruments. I can group them all into a multi-timbral situation. So then all of a sudden the technical task becomes a creative one. It's like, how are you going to accomplish your vision using a technical tool? So actually I get a lot of pushback from a lot of my peers at the college because, for them, it's all about foundation. Like, let's teach them what gets sent on, channel 126. It's like, I don't care.
Right.
I don't care about that. Or, same thing with compressors. Like we'll be in class and we'll be listening and someone will say, I'm missing half of your words, and then they need a compressor. And then I talk about how compression works and why they need compression. And, I'd say 9 times out of 10, the journey unfolds in exactly the same way. Just it's nonlinear, right?
Right.
For everybody. Right. And that's how creativity manifests itself. That's how composition manifests itself. And I truly think that that's how learning technology in the right way is also nonlinear. Because if it's like step 1, step 2, step 3, that shit's boring. And I'm not interested in that. So, for me, I don't think that it's so far-fetched to teach in the same sense. And then my students, walk away knowing things very deeply and in a way that makes sense about how it applies to them. Whereas if it was another course where it's like, this is accelerated Pro Tools, they might know where the different, pull down menus where you can find the MIDI editor, like why?
Right, because you're maintaining kind of this experiential connection throughout the whole thing.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, and also what you're doing by doing that is making it so that there isn't a clear delineation between technology time and creative time, which is probably setting them up for a pretty good run.
I think so. I mean, there's another colleague at the college. His name's Enrique Gonzalez-Mueller, and we have the same sort of concept. Like he's a diehard Pro Tools user, very engineer-centric person, and we're talking about EQing kick drums, and so people are like, I want to know how to do it, or like give me a rule, right. And then he'll say, okay, I could teach you how to EQ a kick drum, but the question really is like, why are you EQing it? What's wrong with it? And so like those underlying questions about why you're using this technology and for what purpose, I think that's really the core of why somebody would ever learn anything. And if you don't give them a reason why, then they're not actually learning it ever.
Sure. So now one thing you said, though, is that you do a lot of curriculum for Berkeley Online. It sounds like you have a very dynamic teaching style in the classroom. How does that translate to online learning?
I mean, it's largely the same. I've actually done equivalent courses that exist in the brick and mortar campus for the online school. Mm-hmm. It's the same. We do a lot of video content, and you do have to create some sort of a framework, but it's like somebody gave me this analogy to raising children, right? Like if you want to raise them right, you have to give them a frame. Like here's where the rules are, and then everything inside of it, you are free to do whatever it is that you want. And then they grow up knowing that like life has limitations, but that they are largely in control of their destinies. Right. So it's the same thing with the online learning. It's like you create a framework, and then within that you encourage creativity, you encourage questions, and you make sure that you leave questions to be asked. You can't have every single piece of information. And even with online learning, there's a person-to-person engagement. It's just digital, so. Right. It's again just a rigid frame, and then inside of that they get to be as creative as they can be, and I encourage that.
Sure. Well, I just looked at the clock and I realized that our time is almost already up. My God, that went fast. Before I let you go, though, I'm curious. What's next for you? I mean, it seems like you have a full shopping cart already, but as we know, rust never sleeps, and so we all have to be pushing for the next thing. What are you pushing yourself in? What's the area of self-knowledge that you're pushing yourself into and learning more about for yourself?
I think so. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I sort of feel like I'm at a precipice where I want to do something different, and I don't know exactly what that is. I don't see myself teaching forever. I think I'll probably do another 5 years. So I'll do a decade of this. So I feel like I've said everything I have to say, that I've made the impact that I can, and walk away feeling really good about it. And then in the meantime, just getting involved in projects that I find to be exciting. But more often than not, what seems to be exciting me are projects which have some sort of entrepreneurial element to them. And I'm actually there's an institute at the college called the Institute for Creative Entrepreneurism. And I have sort of just fallen into doing this. So the idea of taking and building projects of my own and seeing them to fruition, as in terms of the project management and the execution. Whereas, when I'm typically freelancing, I'm working for another person. It's like create content for said developer, manufacturer, do product demo at NAMM. I'm always working for other people. Right. And so I think in the future, I'd really like to be the person that's generating the ideas and generating the work. So, and I am doing that with Beats by Girls is a good example of this happening. But with great power becomes great responsibility. And, I'm working towards that. I just had a baby, and I have the intention of having another at some point in time. So right now I'm just focusing on continuing to do the best possible job that I can in all of these elements and all these projects, so that when I know exactly what my next move is, I'll be able to make it in a heartbeat, and that, whatever questions I'm asking, whatever requests I'm putting in, the answer is going to be yes. So I guess the answer is I don't know what's happening. I don't know where I'm headed or what I'm learning, but I've got my eyes wide open, and I know something else is coming my way.
Wow. Sounds fantastic. Sounds like an exciting future for sure. Well, Erin, I want to thank you so much for spending the time talking about this, kind of like letting me go kind of free range on songwriting and technology, but it was really educational for me and really interesting to talk to you about it. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
And with that, I'll let you have the rest of your day. Thank you so much and have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Many thanks to Erin for having this chat with us. It was really great to check in, find out what she's been up to at Berkeley, what she's been up to in her personal life, and especially working with the Beats for Girls is really a interesting and exciting avenue for her to be pursuing. I want to thank Recording Magazine again for helping facilitate these podcasts. I want to thank Ben Casey in this case for opening the door to meet Erin. And I want to thank you, the listeners, for being involved, for all of the email that I've been getting lately. It's been really great to get that. And then again, just a reminder, we're putting a little push here in May to actually poke YouTube in the eye a little bit. So if you can go over to YouTube, figure out where it is that they are posting these things. You just do a search for Art Plus Music Plus Technology or for Erin Barra or whomever. Find us, like it or subscribe to it or something. Let's find a way to make Google say, hey, these people do exist. We're getting huge numbers right now in terms of downloads. I'd just like to make it so that we this gets surfaced for more people, get more people the opportunity to hear what's going on. So with that, I'm going to leave you go. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, and happy Sunday for everyone else. We'll talk to you later. Bye.